All right, so let's start with section 2. Here's the focus question for that. In 1767, the British government imposed a new set of taxes on the American colonies designed by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Charles Townshend, the government's chief financial minister. Believing that American colonists did not object to taxes on trade, the Townshend Acts taxed goods imported into the colonies and established a new board of customs commissioners to collect the taxes. The board was also meant to discourage smuggling and raise funds to free judges and governors from their financial dependence on colonial assemblies. Although American merchants opposed the duties, colonial opposition to the Townshend Acts developed more slowly compared to the colonial response to the Stamp Act. A boycott on imported British goods developed in Boston and spread to the southern colonies, where many southern planters hoped to use the boycott to reduce their debt to British merchants. Boycotters celebrated the virtue of American resistance and denigrated the luxury of British society by producing their own homespun clothing. Although urban artisans welcomed an end to competition from British imports and strongly supported non importation, urban merchants were at first reluctant to honor the boycott. Because women made many of the buying decisions in colonial households, their support was essential to the boycott's success. Women formed Daughters of Liberty chapters in which they signed agreements not to buy British products or shop at stores that sold them. Boston was the center of resistance. Royal British troops had been stationed there since the 1768 riot against British attempts to enforce trade regulations, and the unpopular troops had been competing for jobs on the waterfront with the city's laborers. On March 5th, 1770, a fight between Bostonians and British soldiers escalated into an armed confrontation, since known as the Boston Massacre, that left 5 Bostonians dead. One of the casualties was Crispus Attucks, a sailor of mixed Indian, African, white ancestry, who later came to be known as the first martyr of the American Revolution. The commander and 8 soldiers were put on trial and defended by John Adams, who opposed both British policies and lower class crowd actions against them. Though only 2 of the British soldiers were convicted of manslaughter and the rest were found not guilty, Paul Revere and other colonists helped stir up indignation against the British through inaccurate but widely circulated propaganda depicting the incident as a massacre of unarmed Bostonians. Non importation temporarily cut British imports by a third, and although the boycott on the Townshend duties faltered by 1770, British merchants' fear of future trade disruptions led to the repeal of all of the Townshend duties, except for the tax on tea. The British also agreed to remove troops from Boston, and American merchants, who also found they could not do without British goods, abandoned the boycott. British American Protestants were also troubled by rumors that the Anglican Church planned to send bishops to the colonies and, worried that religious courts to punish dissenters would be established, further feared for their liberties. The next colonial crisis demonstrated how events throughout the British Empire reverberated in America. The East India Company was a giant trading monopoly that effectively ruled recently acquired British possessions in India. When a speculative bubble destroyed the company's stock, in which many British merchants, bankers, and other elites had invested, the British government decided to help rescue the company by marketing its surplus of tea in North America. By this time, tea was no longer a luxury good, but rather a consumer necessity popular among all social classes in Britain and America. The British government, headed by Lord North, gave the company advantages that allowed it to dump low priced tea on the American market, which undercut colonial merchants and smugglers, and it wanted to use taxes on imported tea to help pay for the costs of colonial government, another move that threatened the colonial assembly's control over finance. Although the tea tax was not new, many colonists argued that a tax on a large new body of tea imports would acknowledge Britain's right to tax the colonies. Mounting opposition culminated in what much later became known as the Boston Tea Party, in which colonists disguised as Indians dumped tea from British ships into Boston Harbor, causing enormous loss to the East India Company. North's government and the Parliament responded with a series of punitive laws that the colonies came to call the Intolerable Acts. They closed the port of Boston until the East India Company had been compensated, altered the Massachusetts Charter of 1691 by curtailing town meetings and authorizing the governor to appoint council members previously elected, and allowed British military commanders to house troops in colonists' private homes. Simultaneously, Parliament passed a Quebec Act which extended Canada's boundaries and allowed for legal toleration of the Roman Catholic Church in that new British province. Meant to secure the allegiance of Britain's new subjects, the Quebec Act also caused many colonists, especially New England Protestants, to fear that the British now threatened both their political and religious freedoms. So that's the end of section 2. We'll get to section 3 next.